Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jeanne Shafiroff, and today with us we have a fascinating man, Vinnie LeVien. He was the head and continues to be the head of the emergency task force for the entire Catholic Church in New York City. Vinnie, so nice to have you on the show, and thank you very, very much for everything you've done. And can you tell our audience exactly what is the emergency task force?
Sure. So after March 16th, March 17th, I went to my boss, Bishop DiMaggio, in the Diocese of Brooklyn, and I wanted to help. I have a logistical background. I used to do a lot of White House advance when the President of the United States used to travel. I was the front man to handle all the logistics, worked in government for years.
So with which president?
President Clinton, President Obama. And I actually did some for President Trump as well. So I'm independent, so I consider myself very bipartisan.
Wonderful.
So obviously doing the work for the Catholic Church. I do the government affairs for the Catholic Church, city, state, federal. So I'm the one that's lobbying for Catholic charities and homeless shelters and Catholic education and Catholic migration services. I've been doing that for 9 years. So I wanted to take my skill, and I worked down at Ground Zero for 6 months on another emergency task force when I worked for the government.
Wonderful.
And I have a unique background in logistics and just being able to get things done. So I went to my boss, and he gave me, Monsignor Harrington and the bishop gave me their full blessing and said, go out and help people. So I immediately, March 16th, March 17th, when everybody remembers the schools were shutting down and the St. Patrick's Day parade was canceled, and the governor and mayor said, stay in, it's not safe to be home. We got activated, and I basically hired a few people that I worked with down at Ground Zero. One of them, ironically, is Rob Rich, who is a photographer.
Out here in the Hamptons?
Out here in the Hamptons. I met him after 9/11, and I basically called people that I knew that had logistical backgrounds that I worked with down at Ground Zero, and I said, you want to help? A lot of them, I have to say, a person like Rob and other people that worked with me, they were afraid, they were scared, and I said, listen, this is the mission. Obviously, it's a very serious mission, and you're going to put your own life at stake. I have pre-existing health conditions for working down at Ground Zero. My wife, I have 2 children, Sophia, 9, and Vinnie Jr., 7. My wife, every day, was actually very emotional, me leaving the house.
Very worried that you might come down with COVID, right?
Absolutely. And back then, nobody knew how serious it was. But
very serious,
yeah,
as we found out, right? And I remember the entire country just about shut down.
Yeah.
In New York, we were one of the first because we were hit so hard with COVID. And it's amazing that you started this. So you founded the Emergency Task Force. And what did that mean? What did that entail? What did you do exactly?
So I knew early on the procurement wasn't there for the hospitals, the doctors.
They didn't have the supplies. We all read they didn't have masks, they didn't have ventilators, they didn't have gowns. So you went out and got these things.
So basically through my sourcing, the White House advanced logistics background, I physically went out and we started finding people where we could get the gloves, the masks, the sanitizer from. A lot of people I worked with are logistical experts, so we found literally locations in New York City that had them. And then we went to the vendors and said, all right, we need the masks, gloves, and sanitizers. And we would then pick them up, and then we would drop them off at NYU Langone, New York Cornell, Health and Hospital Corporation, Maimonides. At one point early on, a very close friend of mine that does a lot of the management for Sony Records, Disruptor Records, through the Chainsmokers, reached out to me and they said, we have a contact with a pizzeria that wants to donate pizza. So Source Pizza, Adam and Perry, who own it on Lower East Side, donated up to 20,000 pizza pies throughout New York City. We basically got vehicles and dropped off the food throughout 45 hospitals every day for about 3 months. Rob Rich, who you know, was one of those drivers of those vehicles. People don't realize back then, everything was shut down, everything was locked down. It was a war zone.
I remember well, and I happen to have been out here, but I'm a New York City resident, and I remember very well the whole city locked down, and it's just starting to come alive again, the city right now. And so tell me, you needed donations, of course, and you secured donations, and I understand people like Sandy Weil, he helped something to do with his plane. He gave you his plane so he could transport supplies to you. And what other famous people were involved?
I have to say a lot of people just stepped up, and people that I did not know before or had really close relationships with. I mean, one of them, the Chainsmokers, you know,
we know them well out here in the Hamptons. They had the big concert, and they got into a lot of trouble with Governor Cuomo because of no social distancing. And for all our viewers, I think you recall the Chainsmokers concert back in the summer of 2020, and it went around the world that the Chainsmokers had this massive drive-in concert where people weren't supposedly social distanced enough. But what happened? I understand the Chainsmokers actually made a big donation of masks, right? And then what did they give exactly? And then what happened after that? Did we have a big outbreak of COVID or no?
I have to say, so a lot of people don't know this. So early on in April, Adam Halbert, who's the CEO of Disruptive Records for Sony Records, and Alexandra Kamens, that basically managed the Chainsmokers, reached out to me beginning of April and said, you know, they want to help, and they want to help basically below the radar, anonymous. They spent, you know, a lot of money. They personally, Alex and Drew from the Chainsmokers spent over, you know, over $100,000
to help you.
To help, and they donated 20,000 masks.
Nice.
10,000. So we called Sandy Wilder, Wild Cornell, and I personally picked up the mask and donated, you know, the 10,000 masks to New York. Now you understand, this was in the beginning of April 6th, April 7th, when nobody had any mask, and when we went in there, the doctors and the nurses, they were basically in triage. This was the point 900 people were dying every day.
I remember very well, and the doctors and nurses didn't have proper masks, or the gowns was a big issue, and they actually were wearing garbage bags. So you provided gowns and masks and then ventilators, which is extraordinary because we've had such a difficult time with this COVID. And
but a lot of people don't know, like something like that. So the Chainsmokers, who I really did not know that well, they went black, meaning they were in the middle of doing a new album. So they were not on social media. There was no media on this. They literally just did the right thing. They then had 10,000 masks to go to UMC Medical Center in Vegas. We had a plane that was donated. I personally then took the 10,000 masks, flew to Vegas, had the sheriff's office in Vegas meet us. We went to UMC Medical Center, dropped off another 10,000 masks in Vegas. They have a weekly show at the Wynn, you know, through Steve Wynn and Encore. So here's two guys that donated 20,000 masks, right, in April.
Right.
Nobody even knew about it. Other people started finding out about it just through the work that we did. Fast forward 4 or 5 months later, they want to do a Safe and Sound concert in the Hamptons. All the money went to charity, right? They brought in this very elaborate vendor that basically did social distancing for everybody.
Or they tried, or something went wrong.
You know,
though.
I was there with
happened.
my wife and my family. I have to say, and I ran an emergency task force for COVID. The last thing I would do is put my wife or my family, my cousins, in harm's way. It was done very, very professional. The social distancing was there. What happens is somebody takes a picture, and they see a crowd, and they see people in the crowd, and everybody wants to be...
And a story begins.
Of course.
And it may not be a true story, but something happens.
Now,
I know that went around
sick.
The world, that media, I remember.
One person got sick. Now, one person got sick in the Hamptons. Now, one person was confirmed with COVID. But instead of saying, you know, you guys tried to do a good thing, and let's work on the first social distance, safe and sound concert that anybody ever did in the United States, it's always gotcha. You know, the governor and the health department, you know, God bless them for all the work that they do. Now, one person got sick. So, I mean, they should be commended and thanked for the work that they did for the city. I mean, literally, the governor and the mayor should give them the key to the city. I mean, they did work in the beginning of April that nobody else did, and nobody even knows about it, right?
Well, a lot of people did a lot of things behind the scenes, and I think what we saw was the entire country came together, and really the entire world, to try to work on this horrible pandemic that we're still in the midst of. And we really don't know what's going to happen moving forward. It looks like it might be, I mean, it's died down, but is it coming back? And that's the million-dollar question. And so you've been doing really amazing things, and I can't thank you enough. And I know my involvement, I'm on the board of a hospital, and almost every single charity that I'm on the board of and other charities have all put together COVID funds to help people. And one of the big issues that we've had is food insecurity with so many millions. I think at one time we had 36 million Americans out of work. Now that number might be around, I don't know if it's 10, 12 million. But people didn't have food. And I remember getting involved myself personally with a local food pantry and then advocating on television for food pantries. But you actually, you started a whole movement for the food pantries. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about that?
Yes, obviously for 4 months we were supplying all the hospitals and Catholic charities and all the churches and all the first responders, police officers and firefighters for all the PPE, the mask, gloves, and sanitizer. And then when that died down, I wanted to continue the mission. I'm honored I serve in the Silver Shield Foundation that was started by George Steinbrenner and Howard Lorber and Billy Walters and Robert De Niro and Chuck Scarborough and David Moross all serve in that foundation that helps police officers and firefighters kill in line of duty. One of the board members, David Moross, is very close with Mark Bezos, Jeff's brother. David basically reached out to Mark and said, you got to see what Vinny's doing. He's doing amazing work. He wants to continue the mission. So thankfully, Mark reached out to me, who used to be the senior vice president of Robin Hood Foundation, and said, let me see how Robin Hood could give you a grant and you can continue the mission. So Robin Hood approved the grant about a month and a half ago, and we went out into Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and to Jamaica, Queens, and we found an amazing food vendor called Serve Natural through the same person, Alexandra Kamens, that helped us in the beginning with the chain smokers. And Serve Natural has healthy food.
And was this food donated by the vendor, or was it individuals who purchased this? And then Robin Hood, you mentioned you gave a grant. How much was that grant that Robin Hood gave?
It was a $50,000 grant.
Nice,
and
good start.
Through that grant that Robin Hood gave us, majority of all that money went to the food vendor, Serve Natural. It's important to know that the food vendor, Serve Natural, Kyle and Jared Lyons, volunteered their times during COVID. They donated over $200,000 in food to the hospitals, the nurses and the doctors. They have healthy food like grilled chicken and bison burgers that come in a refrigerated truck.
Food that people really want to eat.
Yeah, it's under 400 calories. And you know, a lot of these areas, I grew up in Brooklyn, so you go to Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, Jamaica, Brooklyn, the inner city parts of New York City that people forget about. It's not a lot of healthy food. So I can say, I just spoke to Pastor Boyd that literally called me just now, wanting to know if the grant's going to be extended, because the people that wait on the line, when we show up, there's a line around the block. We give out 500 meals every Tuesday and Wednesday in Jamaica and Bed-Stuy. We run out. We then started going into different homeless shelters in Manhattan and bringing the food. I had somebody, a good friend of mine from Morgan Stanley, Ed Sweeney, that donated $6,000 in food cards. That basically the restaurant food cards that we can give out. So then we went into Manhattan the past 2 weeks to homeless shelters to give out food cards and Serve Natural to homeless. I don't think people really realize how bad the lack of food in neighborhoods are in New York City. A lot of these people that lost their jobs, they're not citizens, right? Wherever you think about the immigration issue, they're not getting unemployment, they're not getting payroll protection, and they lost their job in the restaurants. As you know, the restaurants are still closed in New York City. I've been dealing a lot with the owner of Bobby Van's, Joe Smith, who's actually out here in Bridgehampton, and other restaurant owners to open up the restaurants. Because what I've seen after COVID started, there was one essential worker that was there every day and feeding New Yorkers and feeding the first responders, and that's all the restaurants.
Yes, well, there's been a very serious situation with food, whereas food pantries used to have 100 people on a line. Now those lines might be 800 or 900 people, and I don't see that changing right away. People, even if people go back to work, there was a period where they lost tremendous amount, and then we have so many people who lost their entire businesses, mostly the small and medium-sized business owners. And so this food security in the United States will continue. And going back to Jeff Bezos, I had read, and it was a wonderful thing he did, he gave $100 million to Feeding America, which is a massive charity that supplies to many, many different food pantries across the United States. But going back to you, Vinnie, I want to give our audience a little background on you. I understand your father was an NYPD detective. what was that like growing up? And can you tell us some stories of what your dad did and you as a young boy? Yeah. How did you deal with what he did?
So, you know, I grew up in Brooklyn, right? My father was a police officer, but my mom was a teacher. My dad in the early, he was a Marine, he enlisted in Vietnam, and in 1969 became a police officer. As you know, New York City was different in the 70s. And he became a detective and went undercover and infiltrated the mafia. He went undercover in numerous cases, a gold bug case in which he was wired up and arrested 200 dirty cops. In the 70s, he then infiltrated the Sicilian mafia and took a big, basically, mafia head down. The guy that he took down.
Are you scared now for your life?
No, I have to say my dad was, I think, a heroic hero for the city and for the work he did. We were the first police officer to be put in the Witness Protection Program. In the middle of the night in 1978, the streets of New York City were shut down and U.S. Marshals basically escorted us out of the city because my dad had a hit on his life that the FBI and the police department thought it was so serious that we basically went cross-country for 6 months. On the fear of somebody would kill him.
I understand.
You know, we came back. I was a kid. You know, I was
How old were you then?
I was 2 years old.
Oh, so you were very young.
My brother was 6, and you imagine my mom had 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, and
well, she must have been scared.
Yeah, scared, and back then
worried.
Yeah.
But you came back to New York.
Yep. I mean, we came back. My dad was a very strong-willed person. So they basically back then sat down with all the 5 families of all the organized crime families and basically said, if you go after, you know, this detective, we're going to shut everything down. Ironically, about a month later, this gentleman came to my home and told my mom and basically said, the gentleman that had the hit on my father's life said, you know, he carries no grudge, you and your family are all okay. Meaning the hit was off. They knew where we were, they knew where we lived. And they basically sent somebody to tell my mother in a very direct way.
And did she believe that?
Yeah, because the person that was there was obviously an organized crime hitman telling her that we're not going to touch you and your kids. So I think my dad did a lot of work with the President's Commission on Organized Crime, Ronald Reagan, worked for Joe Hines, the Brooklyn District Attorney. He did the Howard Beach case with the racial riots in 1986 when 4 white kids chased a black kid onto the Bell Parkway. They did the lead investigator. Back then, Mario Cuomo, Governor Cuomo's father, was the governor. Joe Hines became the special prosecutor. That was a racially motivated case, if anybody remembers that.
I remember. And what would your father think of, or what would his words be about what's going on right now with the police?
I think he would be very disappointed. He spent 45 years of his life protecting our city and protecting the institution of law and order. He went after crooked cops. He arrested crooked. They called him the cop that couldn't be bought. I think he would be disgusted on the management of our city. Forget about the politics, where the city has gone post-COVID. I think any New Yorker would feel very disappointed in the city not being safe. And the city going back to, unfortunately, times in the 80s and the 70s that, I mean, forget about your politics. You look at what Mayor Giuliani did and what Mayor Bloomberg did, and the 16 years of government that they had law and order, and and wherever you are. I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn. I have a lot of African American friends. I think everybody wants to be safe, right? I have a lot of friends that are in Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights. Nobody wants to see a city that, crime is skyrocketing.
Well, I agree completely, but I think we are living in a time where a priority for all of us is racial justice. And so I think that there were incidences, and maybe more than there should have been, where police officers were maybe for sure overstepping boundaries. And so those police officers need to be prosecuted.
Absolutely.
And they are. But we need to come together and we have to look at the police force. 95% or higher, most of the police officers are good police officers, and so it's unfortunate that this has happened, and it sort of puts everyone on the defense and on edge, and it's too bad because we do need to have our cities safe. We do need racial justice. We just need a little correction, I think, and I think it'll happen. And
Yeah, I have to say,
I mean, I'm positive moving forward. I think we're going to, with people like you, Vinnie, we've come much closer to solving or dealing with this terrible, terrible pandemic. And then when it comes to racial justice, I think we've gotten we're going soon, quick in the right direction of making some positive changes in the police force, maybe a little bit better training and an understanding, because you know, one of the big problems with communication between people is just misunderstanding, and if people just sit at a table together and talk things out and then live together, things change. So I think we're going in that direction, and I think that's all very, very important. And did you ever want to follow in your father's footsteps?
I have to say, you know, my dad always steered me and my brother into other careers. I think his career, I mean, he was a Marine, 45 years in law enforcement, NYPD. He was the executive assistant to the Brooklyn DA, Joe Hines, who is a legend in himself. You look at New York City and Brooklyn in 1990, per capita murders were up sky high in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is one of the safest areas to live right now. That's why, as you know, everybody from the east side and west side, everybody wants to live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's hot. He always pushed me and my brother to do, so my brother's a colonel in the Army, right? He's stationed down in Ramstein Air Force Base. He's 82nd Airborne and Ranger, and he's been 3 tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria.
So you're a family of service. You've given a lot of service, which certainly goes under philanthropy. What you've been doing is extraordinary, and your whole family. And we find that families, if they're involved in serving the United States or very involved in philanthropy, generally, it's passed down from generation to generation, which we see in your family, which is really wonderful. And we have a little bit of law enforcement in my family. On my mother's side, my grandfather was a police officer, but we never speak about it. And I'm not sure why. My mother's deceased now, but I'm very proud. And one other thing, getting back to the emergency task force, going forward, there's going to continue to be a need. We don't know what's going to happen. All of us are on edge. People, you know, we still have to wear our masks. We're still social distancing, washing our hands. How can we help? What's the website to donate to your group so that our viewers can make a donation? And remember, tiny donations make a big difference. $10, $20, $30, $100. And of course, if you are in a position to write a big check, you absolutely must. And we're in a crisis now like we've never been before. Looking forward, it looks much better, but this is not over. So what is the website? And then I want to hear about volunteering.
Sure. So Pave the Way Foundation, it's a foundation I've served on for many years. It's a Vatican foundation that works a lot with charitable work throughout the country.
But are they spearheading this emergency task force?
So what we're doing is everything is going through Pave the Way Foundation.
Okay.
And then all the funds from Pave the Way then goes to all the food pantries. So it's important to know, because it's a 501c3 not-for-profit.
So it's tax deductible.
Tax deductible.
Your donation.
Basically, 90% of the money is all going to food administrative.
So you have a very low overhead.
Very low overhead.
The guideline is, you know, if you have a charity, the overhead should be 20% or less, and this charity, Pave the Way Foundation, is 10%. So that's really wonderful. And what's the website?
So it's pavethewayfoundation.com.
pavethewayfoundation.com. Okay. And what about volunteers? Are you accepting volunteers
Absolutely.
now to work at the food pantries?
Absolutely.
And are people safe? Because in the early stages of COVID, what we saw was the food pantries were losing volunteers because so many of the volunteers were in their 60s and 70s. And this group was at high risk for getting the COVID virus. So a lot of the volunteers at the food pantries all left their jobs. But now it's much safer, right? And you're getting more volunteers back, correct?
So one thing with us, we do everything. We have the mobile van I spoke about with Serve Natural. So we're outside.
So you can someone can drive the van or pack food, or
we have volunteers. So for instance, the two churches and locations we're doing, we have tables, we have gloves, we have sanitizer. We do the tape every 6 feet. Everything's social distance. Everybody has a mask, everybody has gloves, everybody has sanitizer. Obviously being outside, people feel much more comfortable being inside, like a food pantry. The van shows up and we basically give the food right out of the van. The people that are waiting in line, you know, everybody's very patient. Nobody's on top of each other. And I think that for anybody that wants to volunteer, you're outside just like you would be outside waiting at a deli getting food. I mean, that's what I basically set it up. People waiting at a deli getting food, or you going to the, you know, the cheese shop in Southampton. Same thing. We have a food truck. People are waiting to get food. They come up, they get their food, and they go on their way.
And it's so true. When you give, you get. Now we have exactly 1 minute left. What do you want to leave this audience with? You've done so many great things, but if someone truly wants to help, what advice do you give? I
think now, if you see, you know, I've seen it in New York City. It's really like the have and have-nots, right? And people
there's such a divide right now, and we have to make that. That divide much smaller. So we have to make our middle class strong.
Like me and everybody else, I think by volunteering, I think it says something to people that can volunteer right now and help people. I think deep down it'll help them in them giving back. I don't think people give back enough. And you can give, you know, you can give a donation, and that's great, and we're very grateful for those donations. But I think when you actually do something tangible and you're on the ground and you see it. I had somebody that worked with us recently that we've been doing this for months, right? In Robin Hood right now, we're waiting to get the grant extended. And the person came out the other day, and we went to 2 homeless shelters in New York City. And one of them we went inside in the heat of Harlem. And the person saw the tangible work that we were doing.
Yes, I think when you're actually involved, you feel so fulfilled. This concludes Successful Philanthropy. I'm Jeanne Shafiroff, your host. Today with us was Vinnie LeVien, the head of the Catholic Church's Emergency Task Force in New York City. I look forward to seeing you next week.